Good morning, YouTube. It is 10 a.m. in the great state of Texas, and today we're working with a large piece of walnut wood. So ordered this bad boy off of Amazon. It's a 6x6 by 2-inch block that comes prefabricated like this. Walnut's probably my favorite wood to work with. I think it's one of the most prettiest woods other than Purple Heart. This is probably my first top tier wood to work with. So we've done some previous bowls in the past, learning from all of our mistakes of our previous projects. Just going to take some 15-minute JB weld, get that all glued up, put our block of 2x4 pine on there. That'll be our attachment point for our faceplate, and we're going to get this turned down onto the lathe. So it's about, we're having a weird weekend where it's like 80 degrees here in the state of Texas, so had a lot of time to get in the workshop and make some pretty cool projects. Not working with epoxy until probably later in the spring, definitely in the summer, but I think for the foreseeable future, like I mentioned, I'm just going to start doing a lot more just like wood blank prefabricated pieces. Obviously wood or epoxy and the weather don't mix if it's too cold. So for the foreseeable future on the channel, I'm just going to do these cool wood blanks, I think. So we've worked with walnut before in the past. You guys have probably seen me make this bowl, so this is not going to be anything that you guys haven't seen before, but I love working with walnut. It's my favorite wood, like I said a little bit earlier in the video, and we're just going to make a cool, small, shallow little dish and a little bit of a lid with it. So just going to be very careful on working down the material, not to work down so much that we don't have anything left to work with. And now we're going to start the parting portion of it, which is probably the most difficult part. So you can see here that we're having a little bit of an issue with the lathe starting and stopping. I think that's mostly just user error. That parting tool is very sharp, but it obviously wasn't sharp enough to get through this. It's relatively new. I know it's sharp, but I think the motor on my lathe is probably the biggest issue here. But took the handsaw, just got everything cut down off of that, so that'll be our lid portion. And now we're just shaving down our main body of the project here, just rounding out the bottom, and this will be our main dish. We're going to make a mortise and then flip it onto the lathe. But beforehand, we're going to go ahead and just use some 50 grit sandpaper, sand it a little bit just to get everything nice and even, because once you start the sanding portion of it, you're not able to get there the way that you need to. So making the mortise, trying to not take off as a lot of material here, but mortise is a pretty good size. We'll get this flipped over, sizing up the chuck. Everything's going relatively smooth. Probably the parting was probably the biggest part of the project that didn't go the way that I planned it initially, but getting this part off is probably one of the more time-consuming things. Usually when I would do super glue, not super glue, but hot glue, I would just pop this portion off. But when you're using that JB Weld epoxy, you just have to, work this down because it doesn't pop off, obviously. So you have to spend some time working down the material a little bit. So we spent, maybe 5 minutes doing this part, and then we'll come back, hit it with the parting tool, and then it'll just pop off. And here we are doing this part. And obviously pine is a lot softer of a wood, so that just pops off no problem. And then we got a nice flat surface to work with, and then we'll start the actual gouging portion of it here in just a little bit. But once we got this part, relatively easy. The motor on my lathe is definitely going out. The power that it has just isn't hitting the same way that it used to, and you'll see that here in a little bit in the video once we start the gouging portion of it. The lathe tends to stop, and I have the RPMs cranked up, so it's not like the power wasn't there. Usually, this would have been no problem where the lathe would have started and stopped, but this one we just had a little bit more technical issues, but we ended up getting it done, just taking some sorry for coughing, taking some shallow passes here, starting and stopping the lathe just a little bit, but it's just part of the project. Try not to go so wide on the lip, and then we're starting and stopping, just getting everything nice and even. So then we flip it over to our lid portion here. This was really where I thought I was going to have a lot of issues because there's not a lot of material to work with. One of the bad things about working with that size of material is that even if you cut it in half, you got to be really careful how much material you take down. But you saw there, we're just sizing everything up, and we get a fit on the lid relatively quickly. And now we're just making a mortise to flip it over, And then we will see how much material is actually left. And it's probably one of the most shallow bowls I've ever made. Shallow lids, I should say, I've ever made. Again, excuse my coughing. I'm doing this in my workshop, and I think my allergies are affecting me a little bit. But you can see here, we're just trying to get that initial mortise turned down, and there's a little bit of a lip on it, but there's obviously not a whole lot of material left to work with. So I'm trying to be very careful as I'm making this because the edge is so thin. My biggest worry was that it was just going to fly off, but you can see here everything's pretty much done at this point. Just working off that lid so that it forms nicely and tightly to the lid portion here, and boom, there's that part. So pretty happy with that. So then we'll get to my favorite part, which is sanding, but you can just see the mess from just one bowl blank here. Just wood chips everywhere, dust flying. It's probably why I'm coughing so much right now, so I do apologize for that. But once we get this cleaned up, then we'll start the actual sanding portion of it here in just a little bit. But we went from 50 grit, did to 120, down to up to 180. So not a lot of time. Most of the work was done with the 50 grit sandpaper. And then, you know, there's a picture of my elbow, or my shoulder, I should say, and the lathe dancing there a little bit. But once we did that, then we come back, hit it with some Yorkshire grit. This stuff is really good, just polishing paste. And then you can start to see the grain of the wood really come out, and it looks really cool. This is why walnut, dark walnut is one of the prettiest woods ever. I know I've said that a million times. But then we just finish it with some wood wax, hydrate the wood really well. And then you can really see just how that wood looks once it's hydrated. And you can see the grain looks really amazing. So really happy how this turned out with this block of wood. And it's always good when you do a lid, so it's not just like a plain Jane kind of a bowl. And then this technique here, I think I'm going to do instead of the light bright pegs for the remainder of these projects, just making a little gouged hole in the middle, and then just taking some pigment, and then just taking that 15-minute JB Weld epoxy, putting that in the middle of it, and I think it looks really cool. But overall, I'm really happy how this turned out. One of my better projects that I've made. And then just finishing up here, let that set. Love how this turned out. So we are still making bowls on the channel. You don't have to worry about me at the end of the video. Nobody ever makes it that far anyway, but really like how this looked. You can see a little bit of that indentation where that old mortise was, but overall really happy how this project turned out. One of my better projects that I've done, and I'm going to do a lot more walnut in the future, so hope you guys are ready for that, and I'll see you in the next one. All right, peace.